Have you ever heard someone talk about crowing their reed and not know what that is? I'm going to explain to you what a reed crow is and how it can help you understand your reeds a little bit better. So let's start with what exactly a reed crow is. So to get a reed crow, you put your mouth all the way up to the wire of the reed and just blow through, but you're not going to put as much mouth pressure on the reed like you normally would to play bassoon, because we're going to get a specific sound. So, and you want to make sure that your reed is fully soaked as it normally would be. A reed crow doesn't work if the reed is dry. So it sounds like this. So it's kind of an annoying little sound, and the sound that you're hearing is actually called a multiphonic. There's different pitches going on. You can hear low sounds, mid sounds, and high sounds in the pitch. And we'll talk about that more as we go, but it's essentially a collection of pitches. In my opinion, the reed crow is one tool that we can use to understand certain characteristics or tendencies of our reed. And it's particularly helpful if you're adjusting your reeds or making your own reeds. If you're not comfortable adjusting your reeds in some capacity, I'd say using at least, sandpaper, pliers, basic reed adjusting tools. It's not going to be that helpful for you to learn anything about your crow, although it can be good to know what's going on with your reed. I use the reed crow primarily when I'm making reeds and I'm in the final stages, putting the final scrapes in, and I'll crow the reed as I'm testing it, just to kind of learn some things about it. Or if I'm having trouble with a particular reed and I feel like I need to make some adjustments, I'll crow the reed to kind of hear what's going on with it. The reed crow can tell you multiple things about your reed. It can tell you if the reed favors a certain register of the bassoon, if it is a low note friendly reed or a high note friendly reed, or if it's generally pretty balanced all the way around. It can tell you the response of that particular reed. And it can tell you the kind of the general pitch tendency as well. You can crow a reed with the tuner, and some folks are really concerned about what pitch their reed crow is making on the tuner. I think some people aim for an E or F sharp, depending on what you're going for. I personally don't use that as an indicator of pitch so much, but it can tell you something about your reed. So generally, a good reed crow is one that is very complex in sound. I mentioned there's multiple pitches going on at once. And so the more complex sound that you have, the better. And so you want a mix of high, mid, and low sounds. So if you have a reed crow where you hear a lot of high in the sound and not very much low, your reed is picking up more higher multiphonics than lower sounds. That tends to mean that the reed is going to favor the upper register of the bassoon. It can also mean that the reed is a little bit resistant because a harder reed is generally going to favor the high register, and a lot of times that will just mean that you just need to keep scraping more. Consequently, if you have a reed that has a lot of low pitches but you don't have a high pitch sounding, that can mean that you've taken too much out of the cane, that you've scraped too far, and the reed is now so weak that it can't generate those higher pitches. One way that the reed crow can be helpful is it can kind of tell you how close you are to getting to a really balanced reed. In addition, the reed crow can tell you about how well your reed responds. The crow responds the same way that your bassoon does. So sometimes when you're playing a reed on your bassoon and you might get the th sound before you get started, there's kind of an airiness to the sound and it doesn't want to speak right away. That usually means that the reed is a little bit resistant, and the crow will react the same way. It won't want to speak right away. And on the other side of that, a reed that is really responsive, has a nice start to the sound, there'll be kind of a little lead into the crow, like when you just blow a little bit of air in and you get a little bit of sound, and then it'll open up into the full crow. That's an ideal situation for good response. So let me demonstrate that for you. So you heard the kind of ba, and kind of opened up into the crow. That means that the reed is really responding nicely. And so you probably don't need to scrape anymore for initial response. So the initial response is good. So that might mean that you leave anything in the tip area alone. And if you're going to scrape any more, it's probably going to be in another area of the reed. A really common area would be kind of the back third of the channels is usually helpful for low register pitch and response in particular. You might be asking, well, why would I test the crow when I can just play the reed on my bassoon and kind of decide from there? And you're right to think that. Certainly how the reed plays on your bassoon can be a great way to tell what's going on with that particular reed, but sometimes it's hard to know exactly what you need to do to the reed. Sometimes I'll find I know it doesn't feel quite right, but I can't quite pinpoint exactly what the issue is, and the crow will tell me more directly. Is it a response thing? Is it a pitch thing? Is it favoring certain registers? And if you're getting a crow that has kind of a quacking sound in it, it's not always necessarily a bad thing. I've mentioned that I've had reeds that don't have the perfect crow and they feel and sound great on the bassoon. But that little quacking sound can be an indicator that there's some sort of imbalance in your reed. And it can mean, because you have to imagine the two blades of the reed are vibrating together. And so when you blow air past them, ideally you want everything to vibrate in balance. But what I find is sometimes that'll happen because there's maybe one spot of the reed that's a little bit harder than the other areas. And so the air is sort of pushing past it and not vibrating correctly, if that makes sense. I'm not a scientist or sound expert, so I'm just sort of using my own imagery and experience of that. But that usually just means that there's some area of the reed that's not vibrating correctly. There's a piece of the cane that's a little thicker than others, and that's where you can hold the reed up to the light and see the silhouette to understand which areas are darker, which have more cane, and which are lighter, and try to balance it out that way. So I want to leave you with one last piece of advice for using the reed crow to identify characteristics in your reeds. And that is to recognize that the reed crow is just one tool to understand our reeds. Just like when you put the reed up to the light to see the silhouette, and you can see areas of the reed that are lighter and darker and where you need to scrape from there. Just like when you put the reed on the bassoon and actually test it to see how it's playing. These are all just indicators of what the reed is acting like. They're not the end-all be-all. I mentioned that I've had some really great reeds in my playing career, and sometimes the crow isn't what I would normally consider an ideal crow. For some reason, it's a little wonky. And you just have to remember that reeds are made of a very finicky organic substance called cane that is really susceptible to changes in its environment, and sometimes there's just weird inconsistencies in it, and sometimes those inconsistencies go in your favor. A lot of times they don't. We generally want a really balanced reed all the way around. One other thing to note is that the reed crow won't function properly unless it's properly soaked, and a lot of times a brand new reed that's barely been played will not have the ideal crow. I have found that you'll get a crow when you start playing a new reed, but it's not always the crow that you want. Sometimes playing the reed for a couple hours will help it settle into its final shape and sort of stabilize a little bit, and that will affect the reed crow. You'll notice that the reed crow will change from the very first time you play it to when it basically dies. If you want to learn more about the proper way to break in a new reed so that you get the best possible usage out of it, go ahead and check out this video above on how I break in my reeds. There's a process I usually go through, and that plays into having good reeds as well, so making sure that you're breaking them in properly. If you want to learn more about reed crows and is your reed crowing correctly, or what happens when it sounds like this, what should you do, I'd be happy to meet with you for a virtual Zoom lesson. I'll drop a link down below where you can check that out. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please give me a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed and comment any questions or thoughts you have down below.